This will work. We'll find out. All right, welcome everybody. Welcome back from lunch. We're here just so you're sure you're in the right spot. We're going to talk about, from feedback to finish, how to leverage user focus groups for website design. So let's get into it. So really, I guess what I wanted to emphasize, other than just reading through this agenda, is that I really want this to be as interactive as you folks want it to be. This is really a very personal / anecdotal, but I think useful for other people too. But I do want to say that this is a very specific use case study. So if you find that it's not useful for you, like 10 minutes into this, feel free to go to another session. It's totally fine. But if you've got questions as we're going through, I did reserve some time at the end for Q&A, but please feel free to pop up with questions in the meantime. As I said, this is a pretty specific use case, but I do think that there are some lessons learned that can be abstracted to other, perhaps smaller efforts as well. I also wanted to mention, if you folks haven't noticed, there's also a UX session tomorrow. I can't remember if it's in the afternoon or not, which might be complementary to this, talking about smaller scale user focus groups and UX design experiences. So a little bit of background on me. My name is Kelly Tetterton. I'm Director of Web Experience at Clarity Partners. A little bit about me and a little bit about Clarity. I've been in this space for over 20 years at this point. I remember when Mosaic came out. It was really, really exciting. Very, very cool. I've worked with lots and lots of different platforms. I've done some custom development, but mostly working with different content management systems. And I've also worn lots and lots of different hats. So I've been a developer, although honestly at this point that was a long time ago. I've been in QA, I've done help desk, I've been the pointy-haired manager for a while. So I'm telling you this because I have seen sort of like the 360 on various web projects. I've had lots of clients. Clarity Partners has lots and lots of clients, but I did want to emphasize that Clarity Partners primarily works with government, public sector clients. And if you haven't worked with those before, they do have their own set of challenges. They tend to move at a slightly different pace than, say, private sector. My private sector clients always want everything done yesterday or last week, if at all possible. Nobody comes in the private sector, nobody comes to you and says, you know what, I'm thinking about maybe making a website and maybe in a year or two we'll do it. We just want to talk about it right now. That's totally what my public sector clients want to do. They want to spend a lot of time figuring things out beforehand. Again, I'm telling you this because the rhythm of this particular case study project that we're going to talk about might not be the rhythm of the projects that you're working with on a day-to-day basis. So your mileage will definitely vary here. Park District. So the client that we're going to talk about is Chicago Park District. Park District has been a client of Clarity's for, I think, 6 or 7 years at this point. The folks at Park District that I've worked with, I've probably worked with them for close to 15 years because I work with them in another capacity as well. But a little bit of Park District's background as an organization. Tons of green space, obviously tons of parks. Many of those parks are along the lakefront. Chicago gets a lot of things wrong, but they really did a great job with public space, especially after the fire. But almost more importantly, at these parks and facilities, they're offering thousands, literally thousands of programs and events every year. Just a side note, if you live in the city of Chicago and you're not using what the Park District has to offer, you're really missing out. Especially if you have little kids. There's tons of stuff to do with kids at the Park District. So they have a lot of content, tons of content. And whereas you might think that there's not a lot of content with a park that changes all that much, the opposite is true. They're changing their hours all the time. They've got different events, different programs. Things might be under construction. It's information they have to let everybody know. And by everybody, I mean everybody. They're really trying to serve the entire metropolitan community of Chicago across all of the different ages, ethnicities, north versus south. They're trying to do it all. And they have to try and communicate that primarily through their website. And their website does take a lot of traffic. The page views will vary tremendously. There are some days where they only have 100,000 hits and some days where they're going to have 500,000. Those are spikes that are really driven seasonally. So for instance, what is today? Today is the 9th. Probably 2 weeks ago, probably one of their most popular pages would have been their ice rinks page, because it's the end of winter, everybody wants to get out there. Starting in about a month or so, the beaches pages, the swimming pools pages are going to become very, very popular. So I'm telling you this in part because you can't just optimize one area of the site. The whole site has to be really responsive, because depending on what time of year it is, they're going to get hit. Having said that, there are some pretty standard popular pages, regardless of the season. Programs, parks, events, and jobs. So there are a few areas that we could focus on. There we go. So, what prompted a change? We launched a new version of the site at the end of 2017. It took us about a year from start to finish to get that sucker out there and done. But why do the move? The biggest issue was that the old platform, and this is a screenshot of the old homepage, the old platform excuse me, was on an old customized proprietary system. And there was nothing wrong with that system to begin with. I just want to be clear about that. But it had probably been customized over the course of 5 or 6 years, 4 years maybe, because of client requests. In other words, Chicago Park District said, yes, this is a great page, but we want this tweak here and this tweak there. So by the time Park District was looking at replatforming, there was almost no one who understood the code base of this site. So they really needed to get onto something that was stable and usable and could be maintained, because the old site was really a case of you would make an enhancement over here and something over here on the website would break. The other issue in terms of moving was that because this site had been built, again, several years ago, I think it was originally built 5 or 6 years ago, and then they refactored the design to be responsive 3 years after that. Refactored meaning there were some major pages in the site, like the home page, that was made responsive, but then there were some interior pages where they just kind of went, we'll do the best we can, but we're not going to rip out the programming. So we did need to make it responsive through and through. So the goal was to re-platform. The goal was not to do significant redesign. However, it's really hard not to do that, and really hard not to take advantage of a project like this. So we did end up doing some redesign, which we hadn't intended at the beginning. So, where were we starting from? We had a lot of data. Park District, I think at this point, has probably over a decade worth of Google Analytics if they really wanted to dig back into it. So we had Google Analytics. We knew what pages were getting hit. They had done some quick Google user surveys, but just like the standard widget, so you get to ask like a few generic questions, so not a lot coming out of that. We did do some significant benchmark and comparison analysis, and that's the screenshot of what you're seeing here, which is a much longer and much wider Excel spreadsheet that we created based on probably, I think it was 6 or 7 major comparable parks, and then probably another dozen websites that the Park District folks were interested in. Basically to see what functions did they have, what were the labeling things. This was turned into a really big deal when we were going through this process. Were they calling it a park? Were they calling it an activity? Were they calling it an event? So we had all of that. So we did have a lot of information to start with. But it wasn't really enough. Data only really takes you so far. Because you can say, well, this page always gets hit, and then this page, like say photo galleries, never gets hit. But if you're just looking at the Google Analytics, you don't know why. Is it because people are not interested in photo galleries, or is it because they can't find them? this turned into a whole series of conversations where everybody's staring at the same data and guessing about what it meant. So what you really needed to do is find out how people are really using it. In terms of finding out how people are really using it, it's also sometimes better, and it certainly was in this case, to get external validation. Because even though Park District hired Clarity partners for our expertise, at a certain point when you're having these arguments, you'll inevitably have conversations like, well, you just don't know our users the way that we know our users. So there, you get into these situations where you can't really resolve the conflict. A bonus for Park District and other organizations that we've worked with is the publicity of using a focus group. If I'm doing a major project and I'm a private company, I can spend my money how I want. If I'm doing a major project and I'm a public government organization and it's a lot of taxpayer money that's being spent, you better have a good justification for what the outcomes are. So they also had the advantage of using the focus group to say, hey, we reached out to actual Chicago residents, we got their feedback and we incorporated it. But the goal ultimately of using a focus group is find out how people are using the site. So this is where I confess that we had a secret weapon that not everybody can use. A lot of people can, which is part of why I want to have this slide up here. But we were using Smart Chicago. That organization excuse me, made a major change at the end of December of last year, and they are now known as City Tech. But they exist, their whole mission is to improve lives in Chicago through technology. And the real secret sauce is they already have a built-in audience of testers. Their civic user testing group, cutgroupbook.org, will tell you all about their methodology. But the key here is they've got literally thousands of people already signed up, willing to test technology projects that are put in front of them. So we've worked with them before on a couple of other projects. And again, I know not everybody can use an organization like this, which is why I'm going to talk about some alternative options later. So here's where I want to get into the nitty-gritty of what to expect and what we went through. So Park District, Clarity, Smart Chicago met. We clarified our goals. What are we trying to do? And the goals really came down to how are people using the old existing site? How are they getting information? What's working? What isn't working? So the first thing to figure out is who do you want to test? This is important regardless. It might seem like an obvious thing, but cast your mind back to a few minutes ago. Part of the reason that we were doing the testing with the user focus group is we had these, clash of the titan arguments about, well, why are people doing this? You do not want to invalidate your user focus group by getting the wrong set of testers. So for instance, I'd have been happy to test. I'd have been happy to be a tester for this, but I live in Evanston. I don't use the Park District resources. I don't use their programs and their events. You don't want people that are doing the testing that the client can then come back and say, well, who cares what Kelly thought? I mean, she's not a resident. So you got to think about who it is that you want to test. In our case, we wanted to get people from Chicago, so you had to be a Chicago resident, and then they wanted a mix. They wanted a mix of people who had used the website and who hadn't, so they were getting a cross-section, people who had and hadn't participated in their events, and families and singles, really getting a cross-demographic. The next item was developing the questions, which you would think would be really straightforward and simple, and it wasn't. The idea is to find out what are the pain points of the website, how can people find information, is it easy, giving some specific task-oriented questions. But it took us a while to come up with those questions, but then what we found out is once we had a shared Google spreadsheet that we had where we were starting to draft the questions, and once we had the first 5 or 6 questions, the floodgates opened. Like, oh my God, there's this thing I've been wanting to ask people for years, now I have a chance. We ended up with way too many. We had over 50 questions, and there were 50 questions that we all cared passionately about. And Sonia, who was our main contact at Smart Chicago, was very diplomatic and very gentle and basically said, no way. You can't ask this many questions. I think her original target was to get us down to 5 or 6. So it became, this part of the process for us actually became the most painful because we were all really invested in those 50 questions that we'd come up with. So to then go and have to like kill your children down to 5 or 6 was really hard. So the other thing that I thought would be useful to share in terms of trying to figure out how to eliminate questions is what makes a bad question. And basically they fell into 3 categories. There were some questions that were too vague. One of the questions we originally had was, why would you visit chicagoparkdistrict.com? What are you looking for? I mean, that question just smells of desperation. You know, I mean, that doesn't really give people a focus to hang on to. We also had a question, what is your opinion of the photo usage on the site? Which images are informative and which are merely decorative? That's asking somebody to solve an internal argument. I mean, that's so clearly me arguing with Erin about her marketing photos. You can't ask somebody to answer that for you. Some of our questions were too narrow. What incentives do you look for before participating in a loyalty or points reward program? How would you go about contacting a local park advisory council? Those are actually legitimate questions, but if we're trying to have a focus group that's solving the most problems for the most people, these are not it. I mean, especially if we're trying to get down to a smaller set of questions. And then finally, we had some questions that weren't really solving a problem. How would you find and apply for a job? Well, if you remember, the jobs page is one of the highest hit pages in the site already. People are obviously finding that. Likewise, how would you register as a vendor if you wanted to do business with Park District? I can guarantee you that if we buried that page 7 levels deep with no navigation access to it, the people who want to do business with Park District are going to find those pages anyway. So those weren't really solving a problem. So what makes a good question? Ultimately, we narrowed it down to fewer than 10, which again was really, really hard for us. But they were task-oriented. They were task-oriented and specific and trying to be as close to something that people would use as possible. One of the things that we ended up doing is the focus group ended up being in excuse me, one of the local libraries. So one of our questions was, search for Chicago Park that's closest to this library. Find the hours for an indoor pool closest to you. And then we decided to throw in a few sort of trivia hunting questions, like finding out the year the Buckingham Fountain was installed. I do have the URL for the final report here. Excuse me. And after MidCamp's over and we upload the PDFs to the site, you can grab that. One of the, which I should have said before, one of the mandates for Smart Chicago is they are happy to work with different organizations, but one of their requirements is they have to be completely transparent. So if you go to that report, you will see all the questions we used, the summary report that Smart Chicago provided, and then the final full report. So if you want to see all the questions are there, sort of as a good guideline. So what was the process like? Scheduling was slow. From our initial discussions to actually doing the test itself was about 6 weeks. And then I think it was probably 2 weeks after that for the summary report to come through. I'm mentioning this because if you're thinking about doing a user focus group, at least a user focus group that's giving you feedback on an old existing site, the idea is you're going to use that to inform how you're going to build the new site. So if you're going to get the results back, it still has to be in the discovery process of your project, otherwise it's no good. In other words, it doesn't do you any good, or it does if you have a lot of money, I suppose. But normally it doesn't do you any good to get this sort of feedback if you're already a full month into development. Because if there's anything that comes back that says, oh, the navigation that we thought was fantastic is no good for anybody, are you going to throw away that month worth of development and start over? Or are you just going to say, well, I guess it sucks to be a user of our website? And again, you can scale these things as large or small as you want to, which again I'll talk about in a little bit. But do know that there's some effort that you've got to plan for initially. So there's the the usual, like, when is everybody available? There's also, in terms of scheduling the actual focus group itself, just the stupid physical space. Like, where are you going to be? We ended up having, I think ultimately we had a couple dozen people do our testing. We had more respond, but the day of, I think it was a couple dozen. So we'd have space for that. And then equipment. It's just a question, right? I mean, are you asking people to bring their laptops, or are you providing laptops for them? You just need to plan it out in advance. There is then also the issue of getting the people, getting the participants. So there's the time lag that you'll need if you're sort of sending out emails and scheduling with people that you don't know, which was the case here. There's also getting people to help you proctor the test itself. We ended up having, and this is on a later slide, but we ended up having 5 Smart Chicago staff, and then 5 other folks, either from Clarity or from Chicago Park District, to help us with this, which I will tell you at the time, I thought, well, it's a lot of people. It was barely enough for the testing that we did. So you'll need to make sure that you're getting enough people to help you, again, depending on the scale of what you're doing. Crucial here is if it's at all possible to get a client representative to be part of that test with you, so much better. We've done this a few times where we've had a client be with us, and also a situation where the client wasn't with us. You can summarize your findings, you can provide a report, and I will tell you that if you're providing a report, dry or not dry, depending on your talents for writing this, and your report says navigation in the site is really difficult for people with visual disabilities, and here's where it's particularly problematic, that is not anything as impactful as having a client sit down with a woman who's visually disabled and ask her to find a park, and listening to her difficulties and having to repeat over and over and over again searches, which was an experience that we had. And I will tell you, about 20 minutes into that, I think Aaron was ready to burn down the site and just say, "You don't have a website, we're running away, this is too awful." So if you can get a client to be part of the focus group, it's huge, because they'll have an emotional response that they won't have otherwise. So the next thing we did is, so we've got our time scheduled, we've got our testers, we figured out the logistics for these things, and then Smart Chicago said, okay, we need to have you guys come in, we're going to help run this test, and we'll do a review of the procedures. Now at this point, I was happy to do it. I did have a little bit of an internal eye roll, because I'm like, what? This is going to be straightforward. I don't think we need to do this. Thank goodness we did. First of all, going through the review of the procedures for the actual test, I think put the rest of us at ease. Just going through and saying, okay, we're going to have 28 people come through. That's how many confirmed, but again, I think we only had a couple dozen. Everybody's going to have roughly a 30 to 45 minute slot. It's over this 3.5 hour time, so there'll be sort of a constant rolling through of people. When someone comes in, we'll ask them to sign the form, we'll sit down with them, we'll assign 2 people to be with them. And by the time Sonia had run through that, I was like, okay, I get it, that seems good. And then what she did, which I thought was really smart, is she explained, okay, this is how you're going to run through the test. You're going to ask your users to say out loud all the time what it is that they're doing. You're going to be capturing what it is that they're doing. But at the same time, you, the proctor of the test, should really be keeping in mind what you think the user is doing that they haven't said out loud, so you can make your notes later on. So you are being asked to do sort of a double think while you're doing this if you're a proctor. So we're like, okay, yeah. And then she had us pair off with each other and run through a few questions, which was highly revealing because I realized, wait, okay, I'm typing at the same time that I'm listening to what this user is going through. This is really hard. So prepping for the test, even if it's just a few minutes to go through how you're going to ask these questions, really, really useful. So the test itself did give us some surprises that I wasn't expecting, and this is sort of, again, what I thought would be useful to share with other people. Physical space matters. So we had a nice room in a local library. It was about this size, with lots of tables and chairs. I think our test ran from 4 in the afternoon to 7:30, something like that, which was great in the sense that, you know, it's fairly convenient for people who are getting off work, and kind of crappy in the sense that most of the people who were coming to the library ran into traffic issues because we were asking them to come basically during rush hour. So what it meant was our plan, where we had everybody designated with, you have this 30-minute slot and you have this 30-minute slot, kind of fell apart about 45 minutes into it because people were missing their appointments and stacking up. So we thought we had plenty of space, and we kind of didn't at the end of the day. The other thing that we ran into where physical space matters a lot is we stressed the hell out of that library's Wi-Fi. We hadn't really thought ahead, like having all these people, because, you know, the testers are on laptops or phones, whatever we provided, and then the proctors are also on laptops or phones trying to take notes. And there were a few times where you sort of had this ripple go through the room of like, Wi-Fi went down. So physical space matters. Again, just keep it in mind when you're planning your own testing. So we had these 30 to 45 minute slots, which again, I thought in my head, like, 10 questions, come on, that's way too much time. I don't know that any of our tests actually squeezed into those 30-minute slots. The one test that I've already mentioned that I was doing with one of the testers who was visually disabled, I think we were with her for almost an hour and a half running through those questions. So give yourself enough time. It's going to take more time than you think, in part because people get really, really invested in these tests. The other thing is, even though those tests were taking so long, we're taking notes the whole time, really trying to keep up. We could barely keep up because, again, people were invested in really trying to do their best to tell us everything that they were doing. The ADA experience I've already talked about. It was just awful but revealing. Sitting with Maureen for over an hour really made me invested in making sure that the do site was in better shape. One thing that may or may not, again, your mileage will vary, that we found was really frustrating for everybody involved is the users got confused over different sites. Our mandate was to find out how are people using www.chicagoparkdistrict.com. Not surprisingly, Park District has all kinds of other external sites that the www site links to, but we didn't really care about for the purpose of our test. But if a user is going off on the Park Point site and spending 20 minutes there, or going off on the registration site and spending 20 minutes there, it was really hard to just explain to the user, no, go back to where we were before, because again, you don't want to direct that much of the user's experience. It was also really, really hard not to help the people that were testing. I mean, we had these task-oriented questions. They were kind of set up like a scavenger hunt in a lot of ways. So we knew where people could go to find out what year Buckingham Fountain was installed. We knew where people could go to find out the indoor pool closest to them. It was really hard as users were fumbling through not to say, click here, we want to go there. What made this especially difficult is we had talked about in our preparation for the test, we talked about, if users get stuck, it's okay. They don't have to find the answers to these questions, because our interest is just in their experience of trying to get there. What none of us had really banked on was the people who were testing really didn't want to be wrong. They really, really, really wanted to find the answers to these questions. So even though we would say, it's okay, you don't have to find an answer, it was, no, I really want to find this dog park, which also made the tests go a little bit long. But users being sensitive to being wrong was just something we were not expecting or prepared for. All right, so let's talk about the outcomes. So as I mentioned, we had the test. We had a couple dozen people come through. They were great. They gave us a lot of good feedback. And about 2 weeks later, we got the summary report back from Smart Chicago. It answered a lot of our questions and also gave us the ammunition to make some changes. So you will see, excuse me, another screenshot of the old homepage on the left. You'll notice, there's not a lot of change in the information, but you'll notice on that left-hand screenshot, there is a lot to look at there. One of the questions that we had for our testers was, you come to the homepage, what is it that you want to do? So Sonia, when she was providing the summary report back to us, again, very diplomatic, very gently, when she was going through the percentages of what people were doing, she said, I have never seen as fractured a set of results as what you guys got when I'm asking people to go to a homepage. Some people wanted to click on the big green banner. Some people were happily looking at the things next to the hero image. They were going to the news. It was just all over the place. We had already been suggesting strenuously to Park District that they really needed to clean up their homepage. They really needed to give people more of a focus on what to do. And so the user focus group results really allowed us to push that argument further and say, you really, really want a clean homepage. Now, I will jump ahead a little bit to the end and say, surprise, surprise, this argument is not over, because once we launched the site, some of the feedback we got was, well, it's too plain. The homepage is too plain. We need to move things up. We need to have more things around here. So the real estate battle continues, but at least initially we did get to clean up the homepage for them. That was directly out of the user focus group results. The other thing that came up very, very clearly out of the focus group was, you guys got to focus on mobile. I mentioned before that the old version of the site had optimized some pages, but not all of them. You will see in particular, there's another screenshot coming up, the search page on the old site was really, really cluttered and almost unusable on a phone. So we were able to focus on mobile. Streamline searching. So this is what I was talking about, is the screenshot on the left, which is the old site. They just kind of gave up on a mobile device. There wasn't much you could do there. So instead of having, and it's a little bit hard to see, but instead of having all these different options and drop downs that would expand, the feedback that we got really clearly from the focus group is, you got to make the searching simpler. So we collapsed basically the options that people had based on that feedback. Highlighting the mapping options. So this was interesting. Again, it's a little bit hard to tell with the old screenshot on the left, but there are these tabbed indicators. That second tab is a link to a map of where all the swimming pools are. No one ever saw that when we were going through the user focus group. They never saw when we were asking for map or geographic related questions that there was even an option to go to a map. So one of the things that we did with the redesign is really make the mapping option front and center for people so you really couldn't miss it. So all that's great. What if you don't have an established civic user testing group available? you can still do your own focus group. You really can. So these first few bullet points that I have here, clarify your goals, develop your questions. We didn't need cut group for that. Certainly not for clarifying our goals. And developing our questions, we really just needed somebody to say, you can't do a user focus group with 50 questions. I'm telling you now, you can't do a user focus group with 50 questions. Just pare them down, develop them and pare them down and keep them focused. Find neutral testers. That doesn't have to be, going out to residents of the city of Chicago. We have done user focus groups where it's literally 5 other people in the office. Now they're still fitting the demographic that we're looking for the particular project that I'm thinking of. They were Chicago residents. They weren't in any way, shape, or form related to the client or the project that we were working on. But they were, available, there, invested. And any testing is better than none. This is an old article link from the Nielsen group, but it's still really valid, which is 5 is usually enough. We had the luxury of having a couple dozen testers. It gave us the luxury of having a really broad cross-demographic section of people. But if you've got 5 people testing, you're probably going to get, and this isn't like a real stat, this is just my anecdotal stat, you're probably going to get like 80% of what you need from 5 people. After that, you're getting little cherries on top, but after 5, you've got most of what you need. The incentives don't have to be that big. Cut Group, if I'm recalling correctly, they give their users a $5 Visa gift card to sign up, to make themselves available. And then for participating in the testing, I think it was a $25 Visa gift card. So it's not overwhelming in terms of what your ultimate project budget is going to be. And then finally, just spend a little time prepping for the test. There's going to be probably less prep that you would have to do if you don't have as many users and you don't have as many logistical difficulties. But grab somebody and just test run through the questions for 5 minutes, 15 minutes. You'll inevitably find, oh wait, that question sounds kind of stupid now that I'm saying it out loud. Or, oh wait, this is actually going to take my user longer to figure this out, so I need to buffer some time. So as long as you prep for the test, you should be good. So what's next for us? I'm hoping, and we're in discussion with City Tech now, I'm hoping that we can go back and basically run the same test with a different set of users to basically validate, did we solve our pain points? If we were looking for a redesign, re-platform in order to get users to information more readily, more quickly, did we do that? Or are we seeing the same issues over and over again? We haven't planned that out, but we're hoping to. The other reason, other than just validating our pain points, which I've already alluded to before, is we're still fighting about real estate. We're still fighting about, well, why aren't we having the news more prominent on the homepage? Why don't we have 5 more items in the eyebrow navigation? Because everybody wants their piece of that homepage or their piece of that navigation. And when we're coming across these conversations, and we've come across quite a few of them at this point, we're still having those Clash of the Titans things where, okay, we need to get some users to validate this. So the other thing that I would leave you with is this isn't necessarily, like as with so many things with websites, this isn't necessarily a one and done kind of thing. It may be something that you might want to do periodically. Again, I can say that because it's a little bit of a luxury with Chicago Park District. That's something that that client is invested in too. They want to get user feedback. They want to know how people are using their site. Again, that will vary per client. All right. I ran through that like an auctioneer, I'm afraid, which I wasn't intending to. But any questions? Yes?
Do you ask testers to bring their own devices, and if not, do you let them choose their browser, or how much varies?
So for the test that we did with Chicago Park District, we provided Smart Chicago provided laptops and iPads, particularly with the disabled testers that we had, iPads with, I think it's VoiceOver, but some built-in recognition. The other thing I should say too is part of the reason that Smart Chicago was providing their laptops is they already had built-in screen recording devices, screen recording software. So it wasn't just, I should have said this earlier, it wasn't just the proctors scrambling, writing down notes. When they were developing their report later, they were also able to see the recordings of what people were doing. Phones were different. We did ask people to bring their own phones if that's the device that was being tested. But that was determined ahead of time. So for instance, when Smart Chicago was sending out their questionnaire, they were basically asking, would you be willing to bring your phone to test? And if they said yes, then Smart Chicago would say, okay, here's your time slot that you're coming on Tuesday afternoon. Would you please bring your phone as you indicated before so we can test? In other much smaller settings that we've done, we just asked people to bring their stuff.
Did you use a camera or something to record the phone test?
No, we didn't have any recordings for the phone test, if I recall correctly. So that was a missing piece for that, for sure. Yes.
So in a case like this, you ask somebody a question about Buckingham Fountain,
yeah,
and you're going to get data back. Either it's easy to find or it's difficult to find. On a site like this, where there's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of bits of information, rather than like redoing your entire, how does this play into? Not everything could be on the homepage. So you could have a very good navigation structure, you could have a very good search structure, but how does that one little piece help you?
So that one little piece actually helped in a couple different ways. One, it was a prototypical example question, right? One was, how are people even trying to find the information? Okay. So are they even starting from a point of, I'm going to use the navigation? Or are they starting from a point of, going to use the search? So there were several questions that were like that, which is like, is navigation even an element in somebody trying to find this? The other thing, which was an unexpected outcome for some of these questions, and that one in particular, was we discovered that Park District wasn't keeping kosher with its content, and there were actually at least 2 and I think 3 different pages on the site about Buckingham Fountain that had slightly different information on those pages. So that was an unexpected outcome. We basically went back to Park District and said, stop doing this madness thing that you're doing. But it was really that first item that I mentioned that was the more important, which is how are you even trying to get there? So for instance, just to close the loop, if you've got people who are in charge of special artworks or special elements that Park District owns that are saying like, I want, a Buckingham Fountain to be under the drop down, under, parks. You can say, listen, people aren't even starting there. So you're just taking up valuable real estate when you don't need to. Yes?
Did you share the results with the client, the direct results from the focus group company, or did you prepare a separate report to share with them?
We relied on Smart Chicago entirely for that reporting, and their mandate has been very clear as an organization all the way through that everything is completely transparent. So in addition to the URL that I provided before with that sort of main page, there are the questions that we used, the totally raw results from the testers and proctors. I should also say when the testers and proctors are recording their notes, the testers get to use whatever fake name they want. So What you're seeing in that report is, user Red Dog 2020 has this response. It's still anonymous in that sense. And then Smart Chicago took that totally raw data. They went back and layered their analysis on top of it, provided that summary report to both Clarity and Park District, and then they cleaned it up as a final report that is also public on the site. It was great to have Smart Chicago. Again, that was another advantage of using an organization like that. It was great to have them do the summary report, because then you can honestly say, this is an organization that has no investment in these design arguments that we've already been having for 8 weeks. So it really, again, gave that imprimatur of neutrality to it. Yes?
I have kind of a two-part question. The first is, you mentioned that the users, as they go through, are kind of saying out loud what they're doing. Are they only saying what they're doing, or are they also saying, this is what I'm expecting to see, this is how I'm feeling, this is...
Both. Both.
Okay.
So we talked about this before, and I forgot to do it. Let me repeat your question. So the question was, as users are being asked to say out loud, are they saying what they're doing, but also are they saying what they're expecting? And I think implicitly, are we recording that? Yes, yes, and yes. So that was part of the scramble, right? Is when we're asking somebody to find Buckingham Fountain, and they're typing in to the search bar, and they're frustrated with the results that are coming back, you as the proctor are saying, okay, well, they went straight to the search bar. They didn't try to do the navigation at all. They just went straight to the search bar. They're saying they're frustrated. They're saying what they're expecting, and you're trying to record this. I will say that, again, as part of the preparation process that Sonia put us through, and we realized even then that it was hard to keep up, she's like, don't try and write complete sentences. You won't have time for that. Just write something that is sensical enough that you can come back and understand generally what the user was trying to do.
Follow up on that. So we've done user testing so much of that before. What I've had the most trouble with is actually getting the users to say things and to actually, verbalize what they're feeling, what they're doing. And I don't know if it's just they're inexperienced, or they're, maybe shy about it, or they're not sure what information we're looking for. And we've tried to prompt, but it's really hard to prompt without leading. And so I was wondering if you had any experience with that. How were you? Because it sounds like they were really talking a lot. So how are you getting so much?
They were, but you're right. So the question that you're asking is, how do you get users to verbalize what it is that they're doing or trying to do if they're not inclined to verbalize that? That was also part of the preparation we did, which is Sonia was asking us to ask questions. But it was also, you're right, it's hard not to ask questions without being leading. But I think that was part of the advantage of having really task-oriented items for them to begin with. Because what we were asking them to do was already fairly neutral. Find the year that Buckingham Fountain was installed. Nobody's invested in that really. But if we got a user that was, and this is a straw man example, but if we got a user that was silently going through a couple of navigation items and then going to the search, at that point, I would not intervene, but say out loud, why did you decide to go to the search at that point? And then get her to say, well, I thought it was going to be here, I thought it was going to be here, and I kind of gave up and just went to search. I have done focus groups that have had the pitfall that you were just talking about. We did a focus group with another client a year and a half ago. And part of what we were trying to do with that focus group was the client already had a website, and they were internally trying to decide if they wanted to have a website or a mobile app. And unfortunately, my boss came along to that focus group. And he's a great guy, by the way, just to be clear. But he was so impatient. We were like 15 minutes into this, and he just lunged in. He's like, don't you think it would be better if you had a mobile app for this? Because then you could do X, Y, Z. And honestly, like half the room was like, no, we don't want a mobile app. And then he went into a sales pitch. And Gerald and I were sitting there going, well, okay, so much for this focus group set of test results. We'll try again with the next group. But yeah, you don't want to be leading if it's at all possible. Yes?
So while recruiting all these users for the testing, I wanted to ask you what kind, since it is a very huge website where there are people of all kinds which are using this. So what kind of demographics did you specify while recruiting this? Because when you talk of a person with disabilities or something like that, that kind of a user doesn't come across very easily. So what kind do you specify to get these kind of users?
So we kept it pretty broad. So the question was, what kinds of users did we specify for this? We kept it pretty broad, in part, to be honest with you, to take advantage of the pool that Smart Chicago had. Meaning, Smart Chicago has done a lot of effort and outreach over the years to get an ethnically diverse set of users. They don't have the diversity that they're looking for. So we talked about it, we didn't want to throw that in as part of the mix because we were afraid we weren't actually going to get that many users back. What we were comfortable throwing in as part of the mix is getting users from different parts of the city. So we did ask like what their zip codes were, or no, they already had that. When you sign up, you have to tell that. So we did tell Smart Chicago, as a for instance, we don't want everybody from the north side. We got to get sort of a range of people. We also asked for not an age demographic, but were you single or did you have a family? Because the other thing that Park District cares a lot about is serving kids. So we wanted to make sure that we had people who were, if they weren't already interested, they would be interested in signing their kids up for programs. And that's really kind of broadly where we stayed. We didn't go deeper with that.
Did you analyze the demographics afterwards?
They did. So you'll see in the, well, again, I confidently say yes, we did. Within that really kind of broad set of buckets, yes, Smart Chicago did that analysis for us. So, and that is part of the summary report that they have available. To be honest with you, it ended up being pretty fractured. There wasn't a clear indicator that if you were, a parent or not a parent, you got to Buckingham pretty faster. Honestly, the only difference was if you were a parent with kids, you already knew how to register for the programs. But that was kind of it in terms of the demographic usefulness that we got out of it.
Did you find working with this group that you had providing your testers that there was a minimum sort of technical skill amongst the testers?
We didn't. So the question was there a minimal set of tech savviness skills among the testers? I'm trying to honestly remember. I don't think that was a specific question that we asked, but I think that it's a self-selecting group because Smart Chicago, again, their mission is all about using technology to make life better in the city of Chicago. So these testers are always testing something that's technical. It's not necessarily a website, could be an app, could be something else. So if you're willing to sign up for that, you're already self-selecting to a certain extent, which is good and bad, right? Park District, as you may or may not be aware, has these seasonal registrations 4 times a year, and the Park District staff sets up a temporary call center, which I'm part of, and so I'm there answering questions. And again, if you haven't experienced it, these registration periods are insane. It's like 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, all over the city. Parents are poised, they've got multiple browsers, multiple computers going to sign up their kids. But you get these calls and they're kind of I don't know, surprising but also refreshing. I just did this a couple weeks ago, and the woman that I was talking to didn't understand that a highlighted text was a hyperlink that you could click on. We don't get those people coming to our test, but they're obviously still out there.
Once you got the detailed report on this, were you then able to use hindsight to look back at the Google Analytics and find that maybe there were indicators of some of these findings already?
So the question was, having gotten the summary report, were we able to tie that back to the Google Analytics findings? No. I mean, I can confidently say no, we didn't do that. But I'm trying to think if any of the questions that we had could have tied back to that. I'm not sure they could have. So again, the Buckingham Park example, we could certainly have seen, well, how many pages, how many times are the Buckingham Park pages, plural, being hit? How many times is Buckingham Park being used as a search term? But that didn't give us the insight that we got during the test of people didn't even try and go through navigation. They just went straight to the search term. So it's still a different set of data. At least for this experience. Again, I think your point is well taken, which is in a different instance, you could do exactly that, just not for us. Any other questions? All right. Oh, one more question.
You had help writing up the reports, but just could you talk a little bit more in general about how you make certain to use the large amount of data that's produced? Because I have been involved in projects where you have all of these notes from the user testing, but making sure that it is in fact used is another.
So the question was, you're getting this information back from the user testing, and I would expand that actually to, you've got all this information from the analytics and the benchmarking that you're starting off with too. How do you make sure that you get it used? Bluntly, not all of it was used. It just wasn't. In the report, so in the presentation that I had, I mentioned there's 4 major outcomes that you sort of hooked onto. The report itself had, if memory serves, something like 10 specific findings. Once we got past those first 4, they were either fights that I wasn't willing to take on because I wanted to get the project launched, or they weren't important enough to really make an impact. But that was true for those other things too, meaning we did this benchmarking, which was a pretty extensive process, and probably, especially comparing other park districts and what they were doing. And I think probably out of that, I'm trying to remember, Katie, I think it was like a 50-page report. I think out of that, there were probably only 3 or 4 findings out of that really made their way into the final redesign, replatform. But that's okay. I mean, not everything is going to get in there. You can't win every battle. I think it's okay if you do these efforts, these focus groups, this research, and even if just 1 or 2 gets back in, I'd still call it a win. Making decisions with data and thoughtful reasoning, always a win. All right, thank you.